You're watching Euronews now. I'm Takumbo Salako with your top stories. Diplomacy for de-escalation. EU leaders prepare for more talks to strengthen their solidarity against Russia to ease the crisis over Ukraine. We'll have a report from Brussels where anti-vax protesters are campaigning to transform their weekly rallies into real political power. And the best of the Brits. Singer Adele celebrates being the star of the show, including the gender-neutral Artist of the Year.
Germany, France and Poland are united in their goal of preserving peace in Europe. That's according to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who welcomed Presidents Emmanuel Macron and Andrzej Duda to Berlin on Tuesday evening to discuss the Ukrainian crisis. While diplomatic talks continue, many European countries have strengthened their defence systems and have threatened Russia with crippling sanctions if it launches an attack.
The deployment of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine is very worrying, and our assessment of the situation here is identical, as is our stance. A further breach of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty is unacceptable and would have far-reaching consequences for Russia, politically, economically, and certainly also geostrategically.
We have to find a solution to avoid war. As I've said, this is currently our main task. I believe that we will achieve it.
Moscow has amassed some 130,000 troops near Ukraine's border, while Russian fighter jets were sighted near state lines on Tuesday, conducting aerial military exercises. However, the Kremlin insists it has no plans to invade Ukraine. This comes as the Russian Defence Ministry recently published footage of warships preparing to conduct military drills in the Black Sea. The ministry stressed that 3 more vessels will be added to the fleet and that the operation is part of a large-scale naval exercise in the area.
Well, after weeks of relative silence here in Berlin during the time that Russia has built up troops along the Ukrainian border, all of a sudden there's a diplomatic marathon kicking off. Olaf Scholz holding meetings here in Berlin with the Polish President Duda, with Macron of France, and also with Michel, the EU Council President, and the Prime Minister of Denmark. Olaf Scholz is clearly ready, perhaps because of the criticism that he has been too invisible, clearly ready to take a larger role in this crisis, and he's being seen more. The question is he being heard? There is a difference between the way he approaches this crisis, refusing to firmly rule out shutting down the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline if Russia attacks Ukraine, for example, refusing to send arms to Ukraine, another example. And there's a difference between that approach and the approach of some of his allies. He is obviously hoping that he can be both seen and heard, and that the German approach can quiet down the critics, but also make an impact during this crisis. Jonah Kellgren, Euronews, Berlin.
Prior to talks in Berlin, French President Emmanuel Macron visited Ukraine to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Euronews international correspondent Annalise Borges sent this report from eastern Ukraine.
After offering Moscow what he described as concrete security guarantees, French President Emmanuel Macron travelled to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, to reinforce France's and Europe's commitment towards this country's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Emmanuel Macron said that his objective here was to restore order, security and stability in the region and in the whole of Europe, and that for that there are concrete steps, according to the French president, that can be taken. He said that while the de-escalation of the current military tension is very important and that it took a lot of cold blood to stay calm when you have 125,000 troops amassed by your border, there are more profound issues, according to Emmanuel Macron, that also needed to be addressed. He said that he got assurances from both Putin and Zelensky over the importance of the Minsk agreements and highlighted that meeting between political advisors set to take place this week under the Normandy format. He also hinted at the possibility of a higher level meeting taking place over the next few weeks. And while the idea of Zelensky and Putin in the same room seems quite far-fetched at the moment, then this seems to be what Emmanuel Macron will be working towards. He said a resolution to this crisis will take time, but that we are entering a new process, a new phase during which words will matter as much as actions. Annalise Borges in Ukraine's east for Euronews.
As school half-term holidays loom or have even started across much of Europe, the thoughts of many COVID-weary families are of getting away. And with an eye on their own tourist industries, some governments are beginning to relax travel restrictions. Vaccinated visitors travelling to Portugal will no longer need to provide a negative test result to enter, although unvaccinated passengers will. Greece has also dropped pre-departure test requirements for fully vaccinated arrivals. However, as with many other EU states, it will require those that have had their second jab more than 270 days ago to have had a booster. Good news for UK visitors to France. The government has also announced it will soon drop its requirement of a negative COVID test for vaccinated travellers from outside the EU. That's if daily infection numbers continue to fall. Once in Italy, mandatory mask wearing in public places is being eased in response to an improving coronavirus situation. Spain is also scrapping its mandate to wear masks outdoors, but with caution.
Remember that face masks will continue to be compulsory indoors and also at events organised outdoors, for example, a concert and standing or seated events where a 1.5 metre distance cannot be guaranteed.
5 metros de distancia.
But as many of us have learnt the hard way, before setting off, check the regulations of your destination and remember things can so easily change.
The pandemic's been tough for Europe's biggest tour operator and the tourism sector as a whole. But at last, things are looking up. And TUI says its customers seem ready for a summer holiday, with reservations and prices up by about a fifth. After Omicron, optimism. We expect a strong summer 2022. The path out of the pandemic is becoming increasingly clear. Demand for travel is high across all markets. The company needs holidays to take off again. Faced with beaches emptied by COVID, it had to take out €4 billion in state-backed loans. The company believes destinations including the Caribbean and Cape Verde will be popular this year and predicts a rush for summer getaways to the Greek islands as people book a place in the sun.
An anti-vaxxer blockade at the busiest border crossing between the US and Canada has been partially reopened, allowing US-bound traffic to pass. But Canadian lawmakers are still anxious over the economic effects of the disruptive demonstrations. With loaded lorries having to make a 5-hour detour to cross the border, the protests are threatening supplies of fresh produce, livestock, as well as auto parts and other goods. The so-called Freedom Convoy began last month in response to a rule that requires truck drivers to be vaccinated against COVID-19 to cross the US-Canada border. It has since attracted members of the far-right and homophobic groups. Hundreds of trucks have brought the capital, Ottawa, to a standstill. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was jeered at in Parliament for his handling of the crisis, for allowing a small anti-COVID regulation minority to disrupt a country with one of the highest vaccination rates in the world. In a tweet, Trudeau said Canadians have a right to protest, but don't have the right to blockade the economy and democracy, and that it has to stop. Demonstrations have also spread to other Canadian cities and internationally. There have been rallies of support in New Zealand's capital, Wellington. A convoy of trucks and camper vans blocked streets near the Parliament, some plastered with messages such as "Give us back our freedom" and "Coercion is not consent."
It's time for us to take a break on the programme, but we'll be back in a few moments. Do stay with us.